Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from, and welcome to our webinar. You're listening to IXIA Talks episode 18, Which CCMS is Right for You? A look into the CCMS marketplace with Tony White. I'm Sydney Jones, Head of Marketing Communications here at IXIASOFT, and I will be your host. IXIA Talks is a webinar series that covers DITA, Agile Document Management, localization, IXIASOFT's very own CCMS, and more. Today's episode will be a little bit different from what you're used to. So instead of me handing over the mic to the panelists, this episode will be more of a back and forth, so more of a Q&A. I've got lots of questions for our speaker today, and we will cover trends in the DITA marketplace, how COVID-19 has affected the technical documentation industry, and how to choose the right CCMS for your organization. Before we get started, let's run through a couple of housekeeping details. First off, this presentation is being recorded, and we'll be sending this link to the recording out about an hour or so after it airs. If you would like to ask a question during the webinar, please type this into the question section of your control panel at any point, and we will try to answer as many of these as possible at the end of the presentation. And lastly, we do want to hear where all of our listeners are coming in from. So if you could just write into the chat, hi from India, hi from Germany, we would love to hear where you are tuning in from. So now onto the show. Our guest today is founder of Ars Logica, Tony White. So Tony, welcome to IXIA Talks.
Thank you, Sydney, and thank you for everyone joining. It's great to have you here. First, would like to start with an invitation to email me if you have any questions about the presentation. I will get each of those and will respond directly. A little bit about my background so that you will understand where I might be helpful as I go through the talk. So I became an analyst at Giga Information Group before it merged with Forrester back in 1998, and I became the first de facto lead analyst on web content management in the late 90s as it was really forming into a standalone market. And so I have been doing this as an analyst for 22 years, and you might add another couple to that. So this is a space that I know well, related technology areas that are very tangential to content management that I've come to know very well as well. So what I focus on mainly right now is a few things. One is helping companies choose technology. So technology selection, consulting engagements, usually those are focused on digital experience platforms. Content management has sort of morphed into digital experience platforms, especially on the web CMS side, not so much on the CCMS side. But you might think of sometimes digital experience platforms and content management or customer experience management platforms as synonymous. Another thing that I spend a fair amount of time doing is running corporate education series for companies. So even when companies are not actually in the process of choosing or buying a technology platform, they often see a lot of benefit in getting a certain constituency in the company up to speed on a certain type of technology. And when that is digital experience or search or marketing automation or any of those related areas, they will sometimes call Ars Logica in to give a corporate seminar. A lot of the nitty-gritty expertise, a lot of the devil in the details sort of information comes from monitoring implementations. So the next two bullet points are related to that. So one thing that I do is keep a tab on what the quality of service provider services are. So the integrators, especially the partners of the content management vendors, I will frequently keep in close touch with their customers. Sometimes those customers are also Ars Logica clients, but even if they're not, I make a point of monitoring how their implementations are going, so that I can understand where certain service firms are falling behind, and also it helps me to understand in a lot of depth what the causes of implementation success and failure are. So the implementation monitoring is the last of, I would say, the three main things that I do on a daily basis. And don't forget that you can follow Ars Logica on Twitter, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can send an email. I'm happy to connect with any of you in any of those ways. So moving to the, is there a, hello? Oh, I thought I heard some feedback. So moving to the next slide, the question that Sydney asked me here is, well, what inspired you to conduct this type of research? So as I just mentioned, most of my background has historically been in the unstructured content side of things. So this coverage area, and especially the new series of reports, the Compass Guide reports on CCMSs, is a fairly recent development. And the reasons that I decided to do this, number one, there's no other analyst firm that I know of, and I think this is still true, that's publishing evaluations on CCMS platforms. So the marketplace really, customers would say, well, we have a CMS, we have a digital experience platform, but we have structured content that we need to somehow orchestrate a smooth handoff of between our web CMS and a component content management system. So is there anywhere we can go to read research on the state of the market? And the answer was, not that I know of. And so there was interest among the buyers of the technology, and I also got some interest from the manufacturers of the technology that said it surely would be nice if we could point our prospects to research in this area. So I thought about it, and the next point is one of the reasons why I decided to go forward, and that's that structured and unstructured content management platforms, so DXPs and CCMSs, greatly complement each other. And the reason for that is because the customer journey, when somebody's going to your website or interacting with you digitally, they don't necessarily know when there's a handoff on the back end between structured and unstructured technology systems. And so it's a lot smoother, a lot more compelling, a lot more accurate, a lot more relevant, all of that when you have the two types of systems working well together. And then finally, component content management as a discrete technology space has really been in the realm of technologists, but it's becoming more and more relevant to non-technical business users. As I mentioned, this customer journey, this overall sort of experience that you deliver to your customers needs on an increasing level to incorporate technical content, product information, all kinds of detailed information about semiconductor codes and medical device information and all of that sort of thing. So that's becoming more and more of a factor for digital marketers, really.
Thanks, Tony. So before moving to our next question, just to let everyone know, we have a hi from Switzerland, hi from Albuquerque, New Mexico, hello from Wisconsin, hello from Tennessee, hi from India, and greetings from North Carolina. So we've got listeners from all over. Our next question for Tony is, why in 2020 is it beneficial to choose a CCMS over a CMS?
Well, there are a number of reasons. The first one that will jump out at most people is DITA. So for those of you who have been in component content management, DITA is an everyday term they use all the time. But those who are sort of new to the space, there might be one primary criterion you would use to differentiate CCMSs right off the bat, and that is, are they 100% DITA compliant? If they're not 100% DITA compliant, they will likely be some percentage DITA compliant. So that'll be an important thing for you to know. So DITA is number one, a very formalized information architecture that helps enormously with the sort of cleanness of managing structured content. The second point is because of DITA, and not only because of DITA, but primarily because of DITA, CCMSs can manage structured content much better than a traditional CMS. So a CMS's ability to manage that sort of structured content relies basically on surrounding the unstructured content with metadata. And that is a unsatisfactory substitute. So yeah, a CMS really can't manage structured content in the same way that a CCMS can. But that said, it's really important to keep in mind that often it's not an either-or decision between a CMS and a CCMS, because a lot of companies need both kinds of systems. And this year, we've seen a really dramatic upsurge in the kind of forced nature of digital-only experiences. COVID has taken out the analog, in-person sort of component in a lot of scenarios. So that forced digital component is really making that back and forth smooth handoff of content on the back end a lot more important, because your customer will, for example, never call you on the phone, never come into the store. And so some of the ways in which they would be getting technical information in normal times, they now have to get that through the digital experience. So the CMS and the CCMS really are helping companies when they are well integrated in the COVID era in an unforeseen way, to be frank, and have put those companies fairly far ahead of the others.
So when evaluating a CCMS, Tony, what is your process like?
Well, the process sort of follows the sources of information that I list in the Compass Guide. So the process is based on collecting information, using information that's already been collected from a number of sources. So I'll talk a little bit about what those sources are. So at the beginning of an interaction with a technology manufacturer, if we're going to produce a Compass Guide series on that technology space, I'll have the vendor complete an exhaustive and exhausting questionnaire. It's somewhere around 200 questions. And if it relates to the company, to the products, to the customers, to the verticals, to company's history, to recent wins and losses, to revenue, I mean, you name it. If it can be asked about a company or a product or a customer, it's in that questionnaire. So that provides a reference point to go back basically in producing the reports to make sure that I have the most up-to-date information. Now, once that questionnaire is completed, I typically don't have a vendor do it again. I just stay on top of all of the items in the questionnaire in real time as I get briefings and talk to customers and so on. Secondly, customer interviews are a way to validate the responses in the questionnaire. So I don't take necessarily the vendor's word for everything. I have customers validate all of the responses in the questionnaire. I also do this in RFPs, for example, when a customer puts out an RFP to a vendor and we get the response back, I validate the responses for the customer. So it's not that I don't trust the vendor, but vendors can be tempted from time to time, if competing against a particular competitor and they know sort of what the competitor's roadmap is, they might sort of put a glowing sort of perspective on the response. So implementation monitoring is another way that I use to make sure that any vendor claims or any other information I get from the market is actually real. I make sure that product roadmaps that were issued to me a year ago have actually come into reality by looking at implementations to make sure that features and functions actually that were on the roadmap did indeed make it into the product. Product documentation is a way to get the nittiest and grittiest of details. A lot of vendors will include product documentation on their resources section of their website. And when they don't, sometimes I will ask for the product documentation because this is the final word in what actually made it into a particular version of a product. Next, and maybe most important, is the 20 to 25 year knowledge base that built up in this career. There's a lot of information that I have that's not necessarily written down, but it's definitely there. And so the knowledge base is a broad and wide, sort of little more than a safety net. But a lot of the information comes from that, just sort of knowing about a vendor and a product and their customers. And then finally, hands-on product testing. Many times a vendor will set up a sort of a sandbox for me to play in with the product, and so I'll use the product to go through use cases that my customers typically have to see how a particular platform actually addresses requirements. So at other times, though, it'll be a vendor's partner that will give me access to a product, and sometimes it's a vendor's customer or my customer that will give me access to a product. So this gives me experience in actually knowing what it's like to use the product.
So just a heads up, we have another hi from the Netherlands. Tony, our next question is, can you tell us a little bit more about the two axes you use to evaluate a CCMS?
Sure. There are two axes. It's an XY plot. So I basically have some business criteria, and in the next few slides, we'll go through what they are. But those are combined into a single score for the business criteria. The same is true of the technical criteria. And so I plot the business criteria on the x-axis and the technical criteria on the y-axis. So the business criteria are fivefold here. And please keep in mind that each one of these bullet points includes many sub features. So workflow and approvals, for example, probably has 20, 25 or 30 items. Same is true for all of the others. So these are very broad categories, but I do go to the detailed scores and roll them up into one score for each category. So the first one is component lifecycle management. Those of you coming from the unstructured content world might think of library services here. It's basically the ability to check in, check out, manage the content, do version controls, do auditing, do anything related to the content from the time it's created until the time it's expired. And so that's often a 20-year life cycle. So how does the system actually manage that life cycle? And with CCMSs, that life cycle is done at the component level. In unstructured content systems, it's usually not done at the component level. It's done at the page level or the block level or some other level, but not component. Workflows and approvals are exactly what they sound like. They can be a lot more complicated than they sound, but basically this is how is a workflow managed? What happens when somebody is on sick leave? What happens when when the approval can come from an individual or from a group? There are a lot of contingency steps in workflow and approvals, and this basically looks at the complexity of or sophistication of how workflow and approvals are managed. The next one is collaboration and information governance. So there is an awful lot of working together when it comes to delivering a digital experience to a customer when you're managing both technical and unstructured or non-technical content. So how do those teams work together? And what sort of governance is put on the information? So for regulatory and for compliance. So this category looks at two things. One is how do people work together, and two, what's the governance structure for content? The next one is localization and translation management, and this basically addresses how content is delivered to different geographies, different languages. And sometimes it works in the other direction too. Sometimes there will be sub-varieties of a language or dialects, or even sometimes the same language but different country. Are there translation partners? How is that done? Is it automated? Is it done by machine? Is it done by humans? Is it a hybrid? So this basically looks at how you get content created in one language distributed to whatever the customer base demands. And then finally, process efficiency and cost containment is really all about how streamlined can processes be made, and how does that contribute to containing costs. And this is, in this area, in this particular technology space, this is more important, I would say, than in any of the other technology spaces I cover. Is structured content management can become so detailed that when each of the details sort of takes on a life of its own, the costs can balloon in an unbelievable way. So cost containment, the ability to measure that and to keep it under control, is a huge consideration for people in the CCMS buyer's market. Moving to the technical criteria, so dynamic delivery talks about how content can be combined with other content to provide a unique user experience. And that can be different content to the same user, or the same content to a wide variety of users, but it's basically about the ability to combine content on the fly based on any number of criteria. Taxonomy and semantics deals with standards for describing content, and you might think of that as metadata. It doesn't have to be metadata. So the consistency of your taxonomies is the same word used for the same purpose consistently, and how are metadata managed. Scalability is just what it sounds like. You have a huge spike in demand, so how can the backend system scale to meet that? Cloud is a standard answer these days on how we're going to meet increased demand, but a lot of times still the implementations are on-premise, and so the ability to scale is something that needs to be looked at closely there. Flexibility is about integrating other enterprise applications. So this is an area where systems vary dramatically. Sometimes there will be connectors that are pre-built for other enterprise applications. Sometimes there won't be. And even if there aren't those connectors already available, you have to look at the API. So what can you do with the API toolkit? You may be able to do some sort of integration fairly quickly if there's a standard sort of easy to use API toolkit, and it might be terribly, terribly difficult. You might be starting from scratch in that regard if there's not. So flexibility is very, very, very critical, because these essentially are, to a certain degree, integration platforms. Development tools, I just mentioned API, so there's a toolkit that you get for developers, and it basically speeds their job up. So the development tool score is about how does a platform make a developer's job easier by providing certain things out of the box. And then finally, you'll see on following slides that this market is still behaving somewhat like an immature technology market, even though it's about 25 years old. And for that reason, because it hasn't reached a certain threshold from a dollars and from a monetary point of view, the larger tech systems integrators really haven't become terribly interested in this as a coverage area that they're providing services for. So the strength of the technical ecosystem here, especially when compared to, say, digital experience platforms, is pretty low. But so it's a very, very important thing for you to look at. You need to practically make sure that a particular service provider is going to be able to do your implementation. So strength of technical ecosystem is the final technical category. So let's take a little bit deeper look into how IXIASOFT did on the business scores. So this is actually an image from the Compass Guide to CCMS on IXIASOFT. So in the Compass Guide series, there is an individual report, not on every vendor, but the Compass Guide reports themselves are always on an individual vendor. So if you're reading a Compass Guide, you are reading a report on one platform. And so this one is taken from the report on IXIASOFT. And I think the takeaway here is the consistent performance across the coverage areas, across the scoring criteria. So that's not terribly common for them to be so consistent. There will usually be one that is a lot higher than the others, or there will be one that's a lot lower than the others, or maybe two. But IXIASOFT is, don't quote me on this because there are hundreds of vendors in this space, if not more than hundreds, but maybe the first vendor in this space, and I'm quite sure they were the first 100% DITA compliant vendor. So the way product development goes with vendors usually is that there will be a mad surge on features and functions, and then there will be a mad surge on usability, and it goes back and forth. And so when you have a younger vendor, a lot of times they will have not had too many of those back and forths yet. But with an older vendor, like IXIASOFT, they will have had time pretty much to balance those scores out. And so that's one of the reasons why the scores are very high and also very even across the areas. You'll see on the next slide that the same holds true in the technical areas. The scores are a bit higher here. I do want to point out two of the scores in particular, not that the statistical difference between a 9 and an 8.9 is terribly meaningful, but I do want to point out that it's exceedingly rare for a vendor to get a 9 in any category. To the best of my memory, I think there are only very few 9s ever. And so I want to put that into some context here that, and I want to say that I don't think there have ever been two 9s or higher in a single report. So I do want to point out that this is an uncommonly capable technical platform from a historical and market perspective. But again, the scores are fairly even. You might notice the strength of technical ecosystem is a bit lower, quite a bit lower than the others. And basically that everything in that score relates to the size of the company. So when you are comparing to much larger companies and vendors, a lot of times and I'm thinking of a couple of other companies in particular right now, the product doesn't perform quite as well, but the strength of the technical ecosystem is higher simply because they have larger partners and more of them. But the main point of this particular figure is the exceptionally high scores in 4 areas. and the evenness of those scores. That's really uncommon. Look at some of the other Compass guides, and don't take my word for it, but look at some of the other Compass guides and see what I'm talking about.
So Tony, how did you come up with these different categories for evaluating the CCMSs?
Well, as I mentioned a little earlier, I had a lot of sources of information. I had a lot of feedback about needing this kind of report. And so those conversations contained a lot of feature functional level details about what the categories would be. And so it's not completely obvious how to come up with the categories. So you really have to look at, you can't have, 100 categories. You need 5, 6, 7, something manageable. And so you start to look at how features are related and who's going to be using those features. And so you come up with logical groupings of categories, and that's essentially what I did. And so I gave it my best shot at putting features and functions into the right buckets and making sure that those buckets related in particular to certain types of users. And so I would just say it all came from the sources of information and the conversations that those included.
And can you comment on trends in the DITA CCMS marketplace?
Sure. So there are a number of things going on right now in the market. We're going to get, I think, more specifically to that in the last bullet point. But I've already glossed over the first bullet here, and that's that even though this technology has been around for 20 plus years, the market has been sort of slow to grow, and it's been pretty much just in the realm of the highly, highly technical users. And one of the results of this is that CCMS platforms vary wildly in their feature function sets and in the sophistication of the products. So you have some that could be built from scratch in 6 months, and you have some that are at the extreme high end of the enterprise software market. And so in that way, this market looks a lot like a really immature technology market. So that's kind of an unusual trend going on, and that'll probably start to change in the next couple of years. The next idea is that DITA is becoming more relevant to digital marketers. So digital marketers really don't want to know too much about DITA on a technical level, but they are very interested in what DITA allows them to do. And so the ways that CCMSs are incorporating that feature set into the user interface is extremely relevant and interesting to digital marketers who are, for the most part, not technical users. So the ease of use of that DITA feature functionality is improving dramatically. It would have been impossible for a digital marketer to use these systems 10 years ago, and now it's not impossible. In fact, sometimes it's not a cakewalk, but it's with training it can be done. And so I've also glossed over the last bullet point is that COVID is forcing customer interactions to be digital. And so companies that have well-integrated DITA CCMSs in particular and digital experience platforms are responding better, and also it's not just getting product information, but actually providing a better e-commerce experience, for example, because all of the various components that a customer might demand on the way to buying something could need to tap into a CCMS system on the back end. So these are some trends that I see as highly relevant right now. I think that the first one will improve a lot in the next couple of years as the market matures. The speed of maturation is increasing. The next two is that more and more budgets are going to be going into the digital marketers' bottom line, and so they are going to be the ones making the buying decisions on an increasing basis. And finally, the next one, even though COVID sped this up, it's going to remain true. So.
Which industries are more likely to benefit from adopting a CCMS?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that regulated industries have always been the ones that got the most benefit from CCMSs, and that hasn't changed. So regulated industries, and the more regulated, the more the benefit. So a couple of verticals that come to mind right off the bat are manufacturing, aviation and aerospace, healthcare, and financial services. Anything with a government agency whose job it is to regulate an industry, you can bet that those companies are very, very deeply concerned with ability to manage structured content. So, but it doesn't have to be a regulated industry. It can simply be that your company is really, really involved with technical content. It could be that you're in an industry that is not so regulated, but that does delve into highly technical content. So you have a lot of technical content, but you're not heavily regulated. You're still going to need a CCMS. And then an increasing number of industries and customers now need to combine these two types of content as a part of delivering a customer, a digital experience, or providing a customer journey that needs to include an increasing, not only an increasing amount of content, but an increasing number of content types. So those are a few ideas about industries and companies that would really benefit from not only a CCMS, but a CCMS that's well integrated with a digital experience platform.
So my next question for you is one that has affected all of us in many different ways, but it is, how has COVID-19 particularly affected the technical documentation industry as a whole, or perhaps individual industries?
Well, I will start with the cause, and then I'll let people draw their own conclusions about the effect. So the cause of the ways in which customers and industries are being impacted is the integration point between structured and unstructured content management systems, and everything sort of derives from that. So we've already said a number of times that coronavirus has forced interactions to be digital, and that has created a heavier reliance on technology as the only way a customer can get information from you. And so just look at that last sentence, get information from you. What's the type of information they need to get? If that information is unstructured, fine. That might not involve the CCMS, but if it's structured, so anything about a SKU or a product number or a warranty or any type of process that a customer might need to go through, like getting an RMA or so those are all ways in which a CCMS is going to be critical. And then, of course, in any type of machine-to-machine interaction, structured content is going to be the name of the game there. So B2B interactions are often machine-to-machine, so that's going to be solely structured content management. But again, I'm going to put the spotlight on one location, and that's the integration point between systems, and that could be between structured and unstructured content management system internally, or it could be between your company and a business partner.
So moving into the last part of our webinar, focusing a little bit more on IXIASOFT CCMS. So Tony, what were some of your conclusions based on the evaluation you had done of IXIASOFT CCMS?
So I'm going to answer that by providing here a screenshot from the report on IXIASOFT, and this is the strengths and weaknesses or limitations figure. So I'm just going to go down the list. So publishers are maybe the oldest users of CCMS systems, so you'd expect very good multi-channel publishing capabilities from IXIASOFT, and that is the case. Extreme scalability, again, it's the oldest vendor, and it's one of only 3 vendors that I ranked in the leader category. So the scalability, the size of the customer, everything related to ability of the system to handle very large implementations or very, very pronounced spikes in demand are very well handled by IXIASOFT. I also mentioned that IXIASOFT is 100% DITA compliant. It's the only one of the 3 vendors in the leader space that is 100% DITA compliant. There are other 100% DITA compliant CCMSs, but they don't approach the level of sophistication of the platforms in the leader category. So as a result, as you would expect, the taxonomy and semantics functionality here is excellent. It is a very, very cleanly architected platform. Back in the day, SOA or services-oriented architectures was a term that was tossed around a lot. It's not used so much anymore, but the principle is still the same. It's that the architecture is sort of organized in a very discrete way. And so it's highly swappable. There's not any type of vendor lock-in. And so the architectural flexibility is extremely high. And then finally, in the strengths category, the ability to manage content from cradle to grave is very, very robust here. And so in a lot of these categories, IXIASOFT will have gotten either the first ranking or a co-first ranking. And then limitations, I've mentioned that the technical ecosystem is of very high quality, but it's not large. So you're not going to go to one of the big systems integrators in all likelihood and get a lot of enthusiasm because basically they're rather revenue driven, and until a market or a company passes a certain revenue threshold, they're not interested. So I've interviewed a lot of IXIASOFT partners, and they're uniformly high quality. Not uniformly, they're all high quality. Some are superb, and some are just pretty good or very good. But the bottom line is that the partner that you'll choose will be good, but you might not have as much of a choice here. And that relates to the limited market presence compared to the other 2 top-tier vendors. The other 2 top-tier vendors are much, much larger companies. One of them is probably 15 times the size, and the other one is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times the size. So, just not the same name recognition. And then the last bullet point should be a no-brainer, is that if you're not 100% DITA compliant, and if you don't have plans to be very shortly, you can certainly find a less sophisticated platform that might be a better fit for you, because DITA is it's a mouthful. If you're not already 100% DITA compliant, I would say, don't take my word for it, but if you kick these tires a little bit, you'll find out that you're probably not ready for IXIASOFT. So 100% DITA compliance is the last limitation, which might also be a strength.
And one of our last questions here, what are some requirements for customers for whom IXIASOFT might be a good fit?
Sure. I sort of went over this a little bit in the last slide. In fact, I think I covered this almost 100% in the last slide, but full DITA compliance. This is a screenshot from the report, by the way. So there are, I usually give three just obvious characterizations of companies for whom a particular platform might be a good fit. And so full DITA compliance is number one. Number two, as we'll see here, is multi-channel publishing. I've mentioned that as a strength, but dynamic content delivery really relies on content being format-free. So if content is format-free and the destination is not constrained, you might be interested in IXIASOFT. IXIASOFT was a pioneer, I think, very involved in the original DITA specification way back when. And so the pioneering technology vendor in both XML and DITA. So the products from the very beginning have been at the forefront of these two technology spaces. And then the third one would be customers that really demand robust taxonomy and semantic support. So this is all about content, hierarchical content structure as a way to sort of get the metadata to handle content the way metadata is supposed to handle content. But when you look at the difference between metadata in a web CMS and a structured CMS, there are very, very big differences. And so when I talk about robust taxonomy and semantic support here, I'm talking about something beyond taxonomy and semantics, say in a way that I would cover in the web content management compass guides. And just to support one of the points I made on the last slide, if you look at the voting membership of the OASIS DITA Committee, almost a fifth of those members are IXIASOFT employees or customers. So that's just support for the company's ubiquity in anything related to DITA.
Okay, so just two more questions left for Tony, and a reminder that if you have any questions, please type those into the questions section of the control panel and we'll answer those shortly. So Tony, what does the future of the CCMS marketplace look like?
Well, first of all, the integrations between structured and unstructured content solutions is going to improve. That will be in a couple of ways. Number one, it'll be from the vendors themselves. So there will be more partnerships between structured and unstructured vendors. There will be filling out of product lines. So companies that have traditionally offered web CMSs will, on an increasing basis, start to offer structured ones. And then that will also be the case with implementation providers. They will, as they start to see this increasing synergy between structured and unstructured platforms, they're going to start offering specialized services. And then finally, the customers will, and they already are actually doing this themselves. So number one, better integration between the two types of platforms. The second one is a little counterintuitive, to be quite frank. This, as I said, is, even though it's an old technology market, it's a rather immature one in terms of behavior. And so what has happened is that the companies who are producing the most sophisticated platforms are actually improving those at a brisker pace than the companies that have made the simpler systems. And so the gap between the two is growing. Now, I expect this to stop in the next couple of years and to eventually probably even reverse itself. But right now, if you go with a front runner, you're just going to get further ahead. And if you don't, you're going to get further behind. So this is something to keep an eye on. And then finally, I mentioned earlier that the large systems integrators haven't been historically very interested in this technology. But as this market crosses that revenue threshold, they are going to become interested in it. So you're going to start seeing practice areas from the largest of integration partners at some point in the not too distant future.
Okay, and our last question, just quickly here so we can have enough time for questions from the audience, is Tony, can you predict any future trends with DITA or CCMSs?
Sure, I've already started to see the first one come true. So AI and machine learning are really starting to play a major role in vendor roadmaps, especially in the area of predicting customer behavior and providing the right customer journey based on the prediction. Second one, that's going to result in a variety of self-service claims that have been made over the last 20 years actually come true. I've seen self-service on so many vendor roadmaps in so many different ways, and a lot of times it just never really materialized, but that's really materializing now. So the CCMS vendors will start to differentiate within particular verticals by offering specialized services for those verticals, specialized not only services, but product offerings as well. Just last week, I was taking a briefing from a vendor who is about to launch a CCMS offering specifically for financial services, and that's just an example of what I'm talking about. And then I've mentioned this before, but I didn't really go into what a big difference this is going to make on the market, and that's that digital marketers are going not only to become the primary buyers of CCM systems, but they're going to be the ones determining the roadmaps. And so a lot of the demands from customers and vendor roadmaps are going to start look like they're written in English or French or German, but some human language. So the non-technical users will actually look at them and say, oh, wow, this looks like something I can consume, rather than a bunch of DITA speak. So digital marketers are going to become the determiners, really, about where this market is going.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So we are now moving into our questions section, and we have lots of questions, but unfortunately, I don't think we'll have enough time to go over all of them. So we'll cover a few of these, and then we will contact those whose questions we weren't able to answer. So Tony, the first question for you is, are most CCMS systems now able to automatically retrieve all reference components of a DITA collection, bracket DITA map, including all conref and graphics referenced from within topics for processing?
The answer to that is no, because if you look at the number of systems on the market, not a terribly high percentage of them are 100% DITA compliant. And so when you look at a system that is partly or even mostly DITA compliant, there will be workarounds. There will be all sorts of sometimes very contorted stand-ins for not being DITA compliant. So the real answer to that question is a really deep one that would take probably an hour to answer. So I'll invite the asker of that question to go offline, but the short answer is that the answer is almost always no when it comes to are most CCMS platforms, and then fill in the blank, and then the next part of the question is something related to 100% DITA compliance, because most of them aren't.
Okay, so our next question is, how do you assess the risk of DITA-enabled CCMSs that result in a stealth vendor lock-in? What are the red flags to look for? For example, is metadata in CCMS properties refreshed when topics are updated and checked back to the CCMS?
Well, that's another, the devil is in the details there. And was a long question, so to be quite frank, I don't remember all of the components of the question. So could we take that one offline?
Sure, I can certainly send you this person's information. Okay, and we have another one here. It isn't at all unusual for some content to reside in another CMS, such as GitHub, even when a CCMS exists in an enterprise. That is often due to developers and casual contributors that use SCMs daily versus writers that use the CCMS daily. Do some CCMSs now have the ability to virtually manage DITA collections where some reference DITA artifacts reside external to the CCMS?
Yeah, the answer is yes to that. One of the developments over the last couple of years is that the improvements in a virtual layer have been pretty pronounced. And so a lot of things can be done virtually that have not really been done at the repository level. And another trend that I will say is that using configuration management platforms to do things that they weren't designed to do is a very old practice, but it's not a very good practice. And so as the virtual layer improves here, the temptation to rely on SCM platforms to do things that they shouldn't do has become less tempting. But let me just say to the listeners, I knew this was going to happen because this is an extraordinarily technical coverage area. Most of the practitioners are still extremely technical users, and so the questions are almost always going to be highly, highly technical. That will take quite a long time to answer, and frankly, if you don't have the same question, you might tune out. So this is the way it always goes in CCM, is that it's extremely technical. And so if you have questions that you aren't asking because you think they're too technical, you might be right for purposes of the webinar, but please do ask them anyway by sending them either to Sydney or to me, and I'll make sure that you get an answer.
Well, thank you, Tony, and we're going to stop it there. So we do still have questions that we did not get to answer. So if you did ask one of those questions, don't worry, we will get back to you likely today or tomorrow with an answer. So that's a wrap for episode 18. And Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. Our next webinar is scheduled for December 15th, and this will be with our partner, Congri. So just another heads up that we'll be sending the page where you can download this Ars Logica report on our website. It's on the IXIASOFT positioning page. So that information will come in the follow-up email to this webinar, including a link to the recording. So Tony, thank you very much for joining us today.
Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.